Welcome back to Mysterious Galaxies. It's time for another monthly wrap up where I break down everything I read in February, including what worked, what didn't, and whether any of these books deserve a spot on your TBR. This month had a mix of dystopian despair, sci-fi horror, a classic battle between light and dark, and the conclusion to a cyberpunk trilogy. All in all, it was a good month. So picture this. A massive underground silo stretching 144 levels into the earth, where generations of people have lived, worked, and died without ever seeing the sky. The outside world? Toxic and deadly. Or at least that's what they've always been told. Hugh Howey's Wool is a post-apocalyptic novel that blends the surveillance state of 1984 with the social engineering of Brave New World, all wrapped in a claustrophobic setting straight out of Fallout. What started as a self-published short story in 2011 quickly became a phenomenon. And now, with an Apple TV adaptation, Wool has secured its place in the dystopian sci-fi canon. But does it do anything new? Or is it just another dystopian remix? I might ruffle some feathers, but I don't quite get the hype. The opening is fantastic, the premise is interesting enough, but the writing itself is very flat, and the world feels more like a collage of dystopian tropes rather than a fully realized vision. At this point, regardless of genre, you're bound to retread ideas that have come before you. And that's exactly why you need to nail the execution. You can recover the same ground, but if the execution is lacking, then it feels like an imitation. That said, if you're new to dystopian fiction, Wool is a solid entry point. It's fast-paced, easy to read, and engaging enough to keep you turning pages. But if you've already read 1984, The Handmaid's Tale, or The Dispossessed, you might walk away wishing it had more to say. Last month I read Alien's Phalanx by Scott Stigler and really enjoyed it, so I figured, why not keep the Alien momentum going? This time I finally got around to reading Alan Dean Foster's novelization of Alien. If you somehow haven't seen Alien, first off, how? Second, this is the story of the Nostromo, a deep space cargo ship hauling a massive payload back to Earth. The crew is unexpectedly awakened from cryosleep when the ship's AI intercepts a distress signal. Per company policy, they investigate the source, only to bring back something they never should have. An alien life form that methodically picks them off one by one. This novelization follows the film's plot closely, but what really stood out was how different it felt. Alien is one of my all-time favorite horror and sci-fi films, so I was both excited and a little nervous about reading this. Would it hold up? Would it capture the sheer terror of the movie? The answer is, kind of. The biggest surprise was the shift in tone. The Alien movie is pure horror. It's claustrophobic, it's tense, and downright terrifying. The book, however, leans way more into the sci-fi elements. Foster spends a lot of time fleshing out the Nostromo systems, the crew's hierarchy, and the company's policies. Conversations that were short and tense in the movie are much longer in the book, and they're filled with extra technical details. And while that level of detail is interesting, it does come at a cost. The horror is muted. It takes nearly 3/4 of the book before we get to the first real alien kill, and even when the tension ramps up, the kills feel rushed and underdescribed compared to the film. In Alien, half of the horror is that you don't see everything, but in the book, a lot of the suspense is lost. That said, the novelization does a fantastic job with characterization. You get a much deeper look into the minds of the crew, particularly secondary characters like Parker and Lambert, who they just feel more fleshed out here. There's even a short section from Jones to Kat's perspective, which, honestly, I wouldn't have minded for the entire book. But I won't go any further to avoid spoiling the book for you. If you're already an Alien fan, this one's going to be an easy recommendation. I found it enjoyable enough to suggest, and since it's a fairly quick read, even if the shift in tone isn't your thing, you won't have lost too much time. Malice is the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen Quartet, a classic epic fantasy story filled with prophecies, chosen ones, and an age-old battle between good and evil. If you're a fan of Western European-inspired fantasy, multiple POV storytelling, and sprawling world building, this one fits right in with the genre's greats. At the heart of the story, we follow Corbin, a young boy from a small town whose coming-of-age journey gets tangled in world-shaking conflict. The novel juggles multiple perspectives, giving us insight into different factions, shifting alliances, and characters navigating with the uncertain lines between fate and free will. It's a familiar setup, but Gwyn approaches it with a sense of modern storytelling, balancing classic tropes with a more grounded character-driven approach. This was a book I was really excited to read. It even made it onto my list of series I challenged myself to tackle in 2025. And while I loved the idea of Malice, my experience reading it was a little more complicated. Before bringing out the pitchforks, let me explain. First off, the scope is impressive. This is epic fantasy in every sense. The multiple POVs, a vast world, deep lore, and plenty of foreshadowing for what's to come. But because it's setting up such a large-scale story, the pacing can be a bit slow. The entire book felt like an extended introduction, constantly teetering on the edge of something big, but never quite hitting that moment where everything clicks. I actually felt the same way about the Blade itself, and the first Law books went on to be an all-time favorite for me, so I'm hoping the rest of the Faithful and Fallen mirror it. The multiple POVs add depth, but they also have some drawbacks. While I didn't mind the large cast, many of the characters felt similar in voice, making it often difficult to distinguish them, especially early on. And while the story includes a female perspective, that particular character often felt more like an observer, mainly existing to relay information rather than actively shaping events. That said, there are some elements I really loved. Storm, the animal companion, easily my favorite part of the book. I won't spoil it, but if you've heard people rave about that aspect of Malice, they're absolutely right. Also, the themes of fate and morality, who will end up as the champions of good and evil, added an engaging layer to the story, even if some of the developments felt a bit predictable. The action sequences are frequent, which many fans will love. I thought they were well written, but for me, they sometimes slowed things down rather than ramping up the tension. I often found myself wishing they had more build-up to key moments rather than constant battles before I'd fully connected with the characters. Overall, Malice is a solid start to a classic-style epic fantasy series. It didn't completely win me over, but I've heard the series improves as it goes on, and I'm definitely intrigued enough to continue. In the Exile Kiss, the third installment of George Alec Effinger's Mairid Aldrin series, we witness a significant evolution in Mairid's journey. Transitioning from a street-savvy hustler to the trusted right-hand man of the formidable Friedlander Bey, Mairid's ascent in the Budayin's intricate hierarchy is both compelling and fraught with peril. The narrative takes a dramatic turn when Mairid and Bey are wrongfully accused of murder, leading to the exile in an unforgiving expanse of the Arabian desert. This ordeal strips them of their urban advantages, compelling them to rely on wit, resilience, and an unexpected alliance with a nomadic tribe for survival. Effinger masterfully juxtaposes the high-tech cybernetic world of the Budayin with the stark, unembellished reality of desert life, and this highlights Mairid's adaptability and the depth of his loyalty. The plot is packed with betrayal, survival, and retribution, but the sudden shift in tone can be a bit jarring. On my first read, the abrupt departure from the Budayin, the richly detailed setting I'd grown to love over the course of the series, felt like a disruption rather than an evolution. However, revisiting it this time, I found myself appreciating it much more. While I still think the transition is stark, I now see it as an intentional shift, offering something the series hadn't fully explored before. Deep emotional introspection. It trades neon-lit chaos for something quieter, more effective, and ultimately more revealing. This contrast may feel like a detour, but it forces the characters and the reader to confront their core identities in ways the previous books never did. It's just a shame that Effinger died before he was able to complete his series. He was clearly very talented and had some interesting ideas. So, yeah, if you haven't already, definitely go out and read the trilogy. It's well worth it. And that wraps up my February reading. This month had a solid mix of genres: dystopian sci-fi, classic horror, epic fantasy, and cyberpunk noir. Some books impressed me, some left me wanting more, and some took unexpected turns that I've come to appreciate in hindsight. Now I want to hear from you. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? And what did you read in February? Drop your recommendations, hot takes, and bookish rants in the comments, because I'm always up for good discussion. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a new book recommendation, and definitely subscribe, because every subscriber brings me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.